Hey, so I just wanted to talk about this topic that's been concerning a very well-known rapper by the name of Young Buck, and the expose of him and his alleged transsexual that's been pretty much a viral phenomenon on YouTube. Um, I just wanted to kind of talk about our attitudes towards, I guess, what we would perceive as male identity, male sexuality, and how we are coerced into assuming these very rigid ideas as it relates to the sexuality, specifically the sexuality of men. I want to make a distinction because as a woman, women are pretty much free to experiment, have sex with other women, and not be shamed or ostracized or dehumanized in a way that a man would be for having same-sex relationships or anything along those lines. So it's very oppressive in so many ways that, for one, not only for the guy but the person who was actually, I guess if you want to say, complicit in the act. I mean, the thought of the contrivance of setting someone up to be recorded unbeknownst to them so that you can expose them for them dealing with you, that's that is something that's been brought to the fore by other people, and I think it's a very valid question. So it's almost like it would be the equivalent of, someone who's dating a black person, and you film this individual, but I'm the one who's black, and this person doesn't want anyone to know that they're dating someone of a black or African American background. And so what I do is I film them dealing with me, and then to expose them, or humiliate them rather, I basically use myself as a means to do that. I mean, it just seems like it's really self-degrading at the same time, and it shows a real lack of tact, of self-respect, and I think it denigrates not only you, but it basically puts those like you in a very fraudulent light, very cheap way of going about doing something. But it's just really, it's hard to watch. It's hard to stomach the way that we will basically try to destroy any man who purports to be gangster or purports to be this hyper masculine personification that's ever prevalent in hip hop. But logically, it doesn't make sense because if that's the case, then I mean, should we hate rappers who, talk about women and talk about how bitches ain't shit and all this, but then they end up getting married? I mean, isn't that kind of going against some of the tenets that you championed at one point in time? I mean, to say that someone isn't masculine simply because they have a same-sex encounter, I don't think anyone is worthy to make that sort of assessment. I mean, how are those two ideals in conflict with one another when many people who are considered thugs, who are considered gangster, they aspire to go to prison where homosexuality is rampant, unchecked. It's basically a part of the culture. It's accepted in prison. So by that reasoning alone, it's consistent that someone who's gangster and who's, this hyper masculine individual would in fact have such an encounter with a transsexual person. But the black community is just so toxic. It's so self-destructive that there have been people in the black culture, very prominent, how would you say, very, very famous, very prominent figures in music that display the exact same characteristics. It would be consistent with what we would identify as homosexual or transsexual or what have you. I mean, you look at someone like Prince. Now, if you were to see any other guy walking down the street dressed the way Prince dressed, with makeup and high heels on, long hair, very androgynous features, he would immediately be considered a homosexual. But because Prince is very musically talented and gifted, he somehow is given a pass. Richard Pryor, a very a comedic icon of his time. He's considered one of the best comedians that ever lived. He's influenced pretty much every comedian that's known, has in some way, shape, or form been influenced by the contributions of Richard Pryor, his art form, his delivery. It's you can watch any comedian, Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle, etc., and you can see how they were influenced by this man. But this man basically openly admitted to being a homosexual. He admitted it in his comedy, and I think maybe that's where the I mean, it's just so random how we, I don't know what the qualification would be to where we or black people would give one group of people a pass and then hold another group responsible for this type of activity. Do we respect people who are more open about it, who just come out and just say it, versus those who conceal who we sleep with? I mean, it just seems so tawdry that we force men to be clean and open about what they do behind closed doors, lest they be accused of being homosexual or gay or less than a man. I mean, who would want to be subject to that type of obloquy from their own community simply because of who they had sex with? Every single man has had his very, in my opinion, and this is just my theory, but the inception of our sexuality is predicated upon a homosexual encounter. For example, when a man masturbates, he's a man stimulating a penis, albeit it's his own penis. But if you were a man and you were to stimulate your anus, you would somehow be considered a homosexual. So it doesn't, logically, it doesn't make sense across the board. So you'll typically hear people say, oh, well, he's dating a transsexual, in this case, a male to female. Transsexual, therefore he's gay. But that doesn't even make sense when you're dating someone who's basically aspiring or striving to be a woman. So I don't really see how that makes him gay when he's attracted to this individual because of their femininity or their semi feminine qualities. I don't see how that really is logical. Would he still be considered gay if he was dating a female to male transgender person? So that's a woman who was someone who was born a woman but is trying to be a man. Would that make him a homosexual? Are we do we ever hold women to that same standard about their sexuality? Have you ever heard of a woman being called a faggot? Have we, as a society, have we ever pressured women to come out of the closet? Women are more than able to experiment with their sexuality, and they're not marginalized, they're not pigeonholed to be held accountable for that one sexual act for the rest of their lives, while men are. So homosexuality and black culture, I'm sorry to say, but they're not totally divorced from one another. In fact, I would say they're pretty synonymous. There have been many a black men who have had some sort of dalliance with the transsexual woman. I mean, what's the big deal? Why are we so invested in what other people do with their penises in the privacy of their own home? I mean, that concept alone in and of itself seems homosexual to me. The fact that one man is concerned with what another man does with his phallus, that seems homosexual to me. But, and then you also have to ask yourself, okay, where did this idea come from that we've adopted? Because no one was born with the idea, with the concept of what's considered straight, gay, bisexual, etc., LGBT. These are all political things that have been indoctrinated into our language, into our culture. These are not ideas that are natural. Or excuse me, these are not ideas that are natural. These are ideas that, from a societal standpoint, are considered normal. But homosexuality is not exclusive to the human animal. There are a vast array of animals in nature that also engage in homosexuality. So we live in a place where culture and thought has already been established for you, and because you don't question or you don't think of anything outside of what's the current paradigm is, we just go along with it. But we go along with it to a point to where we begin oppressing others who don't conform to this paradigm. But the thing that's so ironic is that those who wield the oppressive, I guess the oppressive sword, if you will, that does the cutting, the lacerating, those are typically the main people who are practicing that which they're condemning others for. People revere Malcolm X, but I don't think they understand that Malcolm X himself was also what we would consider today a bisexual man. Now, does this somehow negate all the things that he sacrificed? Does this negate the fact that he wanted to uplift black people? Does that somehow tarnish his message simply because it's been documented in books that Malcolm X had dalliances with other men and transsexuals? I'm just stating the facts. These are things that you can find online, at your own, in your own leisure time. You can look these things up. But people are so ignorant, and they're just so programmable. It's astonishing to me that people conform to these very rigid ideas of what sexuality is. Human beings are extremely variegated, complicated, complex, manifold in everything that we are. There's nothing about human behavior that's black and white and gray. It's so much more diverse than that. When you look outside of your window, do you just see black and white and gray, or do you see a myriad of different colors? So why would we expect a human being, specifically the human man, to be oversimplified in how he expresses his sexuality? I don't agree with the oppressive ideas. I mean, these labels to me are oppressive in nature, and they don't exist to me. I mean, these are things that I see other people adhere to. The idea, I mean, just listen to the word, the idea of being straight. That alone implies that if you don't identify with this, then you're somehow a deviant. Because if you're not moving straight along a course, you're obviously deviating from the course. You're wayward. So the very idea in and of itself is oppressive. But again, I don't adhere to these very limiting labels that society has created and that people just go along with. I don't identify as I don't consider people black, white, yellow, orange. I don't consider people gay, straight, lesbian. That doesn't exist to me. It's not real. It's manufactured as a means of control. And it's very interesting to sit back and see how it permeates people's minds and how they actually give credence to it. But there are so many black people who that are very, very iconic figures that were, the best at what they did. And if you read any of their biographies, their autobiographies, they had some sort of encounter with the same sex. It just is what it is. But again, I just wanted to say, I mean, I just got done watching some of the videos, and I watched how people are willing to throw this man under the bus and get him to a point to where, his career. I mean, people want to see you destroyed. They want to see you when you're down. They want to make fun of you. And especially in a situation like this, it's just very, very, I don't know how you would, very, very lurid, I guess, very lurid in nature. And the problem that I have is that it's typically something that's targeted towards men, and unfortunately it's targeted towards men by other men. I think men are the biggest perpetrators of this current rigid paradigm of what we would call sexuality. I think sexuality is it's something that's it's malleable. It's conditional. It depends on where you are, how you grew up. It's like religion. People who conform to a religion, do they conform to the religion because someone told it to them when they were very young and vulnerable and didn't know anything else, and so they just swallowed it up, and products of the hive mind? It's the same with sexuality. If you lived in an area where homosexuality and transgenderism was just quotidian, it was just commonplace, and you wouldn't think to question it. There are certain cultures in the world that actually think that transsexuals are to be revered, to be respected. They consider them two-spirited. Native Americans. I think I read somewhere in Polynesian culture that they don't treat transsexual people the same way that America treats them. So people need to just open their minds. Let people do what they do behind closed doors. Like it shouldn't be an attestation of who they are as an individual based on who they have sex with. Like, who I have sex with does not define me. And I think that's something that's something that's levied against men by women in order to control men and to shame them and to make sure that men focus all of their energy, especially sexual energy, for women, because women can benefit from that in a various ways. But anyway, just some thoughts. If you have taken the time to listen, I appreciate you listening to my thoughts, and yeah, I hope you have a good night. Thanks.